Thanks again for helping us to reach our goal of 30,000 subscribers, the first of many. And in answer to your request, here's a Q&A session with me, Donald Osborne.
Thomas Ryan says, Donald Osborne is the nicest guy on YouTube. I love listening to him talk about cars. My question is, who would you like to interview about cars, past or present?
First of all, Thomas, you are too kind. Thank you very much. And I'm extremely lucky to do what it is that I do, and I love what it is that I do. In terms of interviewing people, I've had the opportunity to interview some of the people who I consider my greatest heroes, and I'm very grateful for that. But there are a couple of people who I wish I would have had the chance to interview, and they would include people like Edsel Ford and Vincenzo Lancia, Harley Earl, Juan Manuel Fangio. I think it would have been amazing just to get a bit of what was inside the head of these great, creative, and accomplished people.
SW651 asks, what is your absolute favorite car of all time?
Well, that's almost impossible to say, but I've often been asked the question, if I could only have one car, what might it be? And for me, it would probably be a 1952 Fiat Ottovu Coupe with factory coachwork designed by Fabio Luigi Rappi. It's one of my favorite cars on the planet. It's a great sports racing car. It looks wonderful. It sounds great. And they're very rare and terrific. So if I had to have one, that would probably be it.
DMA says, nice. Congratulations on the 30,000. What are the cars that you think are cheap and underrated, even though they have many credentials? Give me 5 different cars if you can, please.
Okay, at least it's not a top 10 list, for which I thank you. It's a really interesting thing to try to determine what is cheap to one person may not be cheap to somebody else. But I'd certainly say that these are cars that I think have really great attributes, but are largely overlooked in the market and I think undervalued for what they are. The first is the AMC AMX 390 340, an amazing car, for me, one of the best muscle pony cars out there. The second would be the Citroën SM. I think this perfect combination of great French style, the great dynamic qualities of the Citroën hydro-pneumatic system, and a great Maserati V6 engine. The Jaguar XJS. I had one of those cars. They're fantastic cruisers. A lot of people misunderstand those cars because they think, well, it's not an XKE. No, it's not. It's a GT car, and I love that. And speaking of GT cars, Corvairs. My first car was a Corvair, but I especially think the turbocharged Corvairs are largely overlooked and greatly undervalued for what they offer you. The Monza Spider and the later Corsa cars are absolutely terrific, and I think offer a great deal of bang for the buck. And then, of course, the Lamborghini Islero. Lots of people love early Lamborghinis, lots of people love late Lamborghinis, but the Lamborghini Islero seems to be slightly overlooked. Terrific performance, I think really elegant style, and a car that gives you all the performance, practically, of a Miura at a fraction of the price.
Josh Dobson says, over the years I've seen you have quite the range of taste for cars, but do you have a favorite, or at least some sort of top 3?
Josh, that is also a really good question, and I'm glad that you have recognized that I do have a very wide range in my car tastes. And I love all cars. I love Italian cars, German cars, Swedish cars, French cars, English cars, American cars. And so it's tough for me to sort of pick the tops in those, but I would say this. I think a lot of people will be very surprised to hear that in my list of cars I must own before I give up my driver's license is a 1965 Mustang K-Code Fastback. People know I love Italian cars, and they might be surprised about that, but it's one of my favorite cars on the planet.
Henry asks, what is the favorite of the Italian cars you have owned? I believe you have or have owned in the past a Lancia Fulvia Zagato Sport, a Ferrari 308 GT4, and I think a Lamborghini Islero.
Well, first and foremost, this is, again, a question on which I have to waffle a little bit. I've owned a lot of great Italian cars, including a bunch of Alfas, more Lancias. I did, of course, have a Lamborghini Islero, which I absolutely loved. And of all those cars, I mean, I know certainly a very special place in my heart has to go to that Lancia Fulvia Sport. It was an amazing car that gave me a smile every time I got behind the wheel of it. I actually bought the car, kept it for a number of years, traded it away for another car, a Lancia Ardea, then bought it back from the person to whom I traded it, and then sold it again to get another car. So that was a car that I had a hard time letting go of. And the 308 GT4 really holds a great place in my heart as well because of the first Ferrari I had. And it's a car, again, driving that car was just absolutely amazing. But I probably have to say, just thinking about the fact that the best day in my life is today, my strange Italian pair right now, my 1987 Fiat Panda 750CL and my Ferrari Roma. That will do it for me for Italians.
Steve Gallagher writes, Mr. Osborne, do you feel the availability and cost of gasoline and petroleum products will impact classic car collecting in the future decades?
Steve, yes it will, but not in a negative way. I feel very strongly that the development of the synthetic sustainable fuels will help to maintain our use of our classic internal combustion cars for a very long time. And it's a very interesting thing that the biggest obstacle right now to those fuels is one of cost. But in reality, most of us who collect cars, certainly me, would gladly pay a little more than we pay right now for pump gas for a sustainable fuel that could help us keep driving the cars that we love. So I think that that will be actually one of the points of engagement for these synthetic sustainable fuels will be in the collector car space, which will be great for us and great for the world.
Nart Stripe Ferrari 458 asks, how did you get your start as a noted appraiser and automotive expert?
Hey there, Nart. Great handle, by the way. I arrived at the place where I am today in almost imperceptible steps. I mean, I've been a car lover since I was 6 years old. I spent my entire youth reading about cars, learning about cars, becoming passionate about them. I wanted to be a car designer at one point. Took another turn into opera, but that's another story entirely for a different set of Q&A questions. And I don't know, it could have been the moment when I contributed my first article to a car magazine at 40 years old. It could have been when I started my appraisal business when I was 48. But every step that I took led me to where I am today, and the heart of it all was being curious, asking questions, taking this great lesson that my mother, who was a school teacher for 45 years, taught me. Know what you don't know and know who to ask to find out. That has really been the guiding force to get me where I am today.
Matthew Harmon asks, value-wise, what is your forecast for Bugatti versus Koenigsegg?
Matthew, values are always dependent on the market and market demand. And what drives market demand are the attributes of a specific car and what makes it appealing to prospective owners. And in this case, it's quite interesting because both the Bugatti and the Koenigsegg are designed for maximum performance. And quite honestly, most of the people that buy these cars don't actually drive them and certainly use them to the maximum performance. So it then becomes a question of what is it that makes these cars intrinsically interesting if you're not going to use them in the way the manufacturers intended. And here I have to say that while the Koenigsegg is a superb product and what Christian Koenigsegg does in building these cars with his own engine, etc., is a really remarkable achievement, ultimately Bugatti is a name with a great and long history. So I think ultimately for a long-term value aspect, probably Bugattis will hold their value longer than the Koenigsegg's will simply because of the history of the company. Especially, again, once we get to the point where these cars are not being used on a regular basis at anywhere near their performance capabilities.
From Jason M., do you have a favorite manufacturer of eyeglasses? If so, who is it?
Jason, I'm glad you noticed that in addition to the various addictions that I have to cars and watches and toy cars and real cars, I also have this strange attraction to eyeglasses. And it is a very, very, very strange thing that, much like a NASCAR change where, you have the guy that comes around with all the hats to wear, it's sort of an interesting thing to go through the various glasses that I have. I look at glasses the way I look at cars, sort of horses for courses, glasses for occasions. And I can't say that I really have a favorite eyeglass supplier. I bought a lot of my eyeglasses overseas in France and in Italy, but I also like to buy vintage glasses wherever I can and put my prescription in, which is also a lot of fun to do. I do have one manufacturer here that I really like. Alan Scura does great designs for glasses, a lot of them based on vintage designs, and gives a lot of scope for expression of personality. So whatever you want to see, you can find it.
Dara McKenna wants to know, Donald, what is your favorite coach building company?
Dara, you of all people know that that's an impossible question to answer. So if I may, once again, waffle on this one, I'd probably have to say, if I were to pick favorites, if I can go sort of country by country, in the US it'd probably be Murphy, Pasadena, California. They made some incredibly elegant yet sporty bodies for cars like Duesenbergs and Packards and Cadillacs, just amazing stuff. In the UK, Gurney Nutting, the same reason. Their 1930s designs for Bentley and Rolls-Royce and some of the Continental marques were incredibly elegant and yet undeniably sporty. In France, Chaperon, Henri Chaperon, very simple sort of elemental designs, and of course the later work that he did for Citroën with all those wonderful special Citroëns in the 1960s and late 50s is amazing. In Italy, it's really, really hard. So I'd probably have to say Carrozzeria Vignale, and mainly because of all the work that Giovanni Michelotti did with Vignale. And he was an amazingly imaginative designer, and he just let his imagination run riot. So if you'll accept that answer, Dara, and I know you will, that is it.
Donald Washington asks, what's the future for classic cars in general?
Donald, first of all, you've got a great name, so I'm glad to ask this question, glad you asked it. I think the future for classic cars is a bright one for a couple of reasons. One, because the collector car field is continually growing. I mean, collecting cars is still basically a new thing, basically started after World War II, and it takes about 10 or 15 years before we can actually see the qualities in a car that makes it something that's worth preserving and celebrating. And we're now seeing that in the cars built in the early 2000s, 1990s, 1980s, just the way we saw it in the decades past. And so they're still building really interesting cars today. Whether they will capture our imagination 10 and 20 years from now, I don't know, but they are building the collector cars of 2042 right now. So I think that as long as cars maintain an emotional connection with people, there will always be a collector car field.
Subi Snacks wants to know, what sparked your passion for cars?
Subi, that's another great question. As many people who watch this channel know, I grew up in New York City. And so my family didn't buy their first car until I was 12, because you didn't need a car in New York. And so I became a car nut by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, and certainly by the time I was 8, I went to my first car show in New York. And I was just overwhelmed to see these cars that I'd looked at and pored over in magazines and books in person, and to find out so many things about the people who made the cars and the people they made the cars for, really sort of drove me. It's my curiosity more than anything else that really made me a car nut. I wanted to find out everything I could about cars and just the way they made me feel. They made me smile when I looked at them, when I heard them, when I rode in them. And that hasn't left me to this point today. So I guess that's how I got to become the car nut I am.
JD says, I want to see Donald eat pizza.
JD, I'm glad that you really love the opening of Mansions Motorcars and the way it reflects the great relationship I have with Jay. But the reality is, I do eat pizza. I love pizza, in fact. And There's a place, whenever I get back to Italy, I used to live for part of the year in a place called Bergamo, Italy, which is near Milan. And every time I get back to Bergamo, the very first thing I do is go to my favorite restaurant, Ristorante Pizzeria San Vigilio. And I have a wonderful margherita al crudo pizza with mozzarella, tomatoes, and prosciutto ham. It is absolutely fantastic. So I do eat pizza. I don't know if you'll see a video of me eating pizza anytime soon, but I can assure you, I eat it.
From Brian Fox's Flying Iron, with all the money involved in vintage motoring and the lack of technicians able to diagnose and repair classic vehicles without a computer telling them which parts to change, is there any reason why a well-known vintage racing shop couldn't charge more for labor than a local Kia dealership or an oil change shop?
Brian, there's absolutely no reason why a reputable shop doing repairs on classic and vintage cars shouldn't be able to charge more than a dealership with technicians. But this is the thing. You mentioned vintage racing, and I used to be a vintage racer, and for most vintage racers, it's a very optional activity. So the willingness to spend a lot of money on getting your car repaired is probably less than it would be for your everyday car, and certainly for your everyday on-the-road classic car. For that, I know personally, and I certainly advise all of my friends and clients this, if you're having maintenance done on a classic car, don't shop by price. You want to go to the shop that knows what they're doing, that has the reputation. The money you save today will be money you'll spend tomorrow.
Gen 2 asks, if you had to pick one car from the 1960s, being the car was under $10,000 when new, which car would it be and why?
Gen 2, this is the easiest question that I've been asked so far. 1969 Corvette Corsa, full stop. An amazing car. It was fairly expensive for the time, but still well under $10,000, which is the province of Italian sports cars, and delivered amazing performance. Performance equaling that of a contemporary Porsche at a fraction of the price, and a beautiful car at that.
I Drive Art Triad Spin Table Tennis says, congrats on the 30,000. Audrain is a neat museum. Love their rotation of cars on display. How did you and Jay get involved with this project?
Thanks, iDrive. I think the Audrain is a really neat place too. The way that I understand that Jay became involved here at the Audrain was that through a relative who lives in Massachusetts, he met the chairman and one of the founders of the Audrain and came to know the place. I got involved because Jay recommended me to the Audrain in 2016 when they needed to have the collections appraised. And so I came to do the appraisal, and then I was engaged here as a consultant on the collection and building the collection and acquisitions. And when the first Concours and Motor Week came up, they asked me to serve as a consultant for that. And in 2019, when the first event happened, the day before the Concours, they asked if I would come here on board as CEO to help take the organization to the next level. And having fallen in love with the great team here at Audrain and Newport itself, I said, why not? And I was here.
Troy Patillo writes, Donald, what's your opinion on the 1990 through 1995 4-cam 32-valve Corvette ZR1 increasing in value, even if it's just a little?
Troy, that is a wonderful car. I happen to think the C4 Corvette is a really attractive car, and the engineering that went into that Lotus-designed 4-cam engine in the ZR1 is absolutely astounding. I happen to think, just like most limited production cars of that type, they're already rising in value, and I think that they will continue to steadily rise in value, and especially those well-maintained examples that have been driven, that have been maintained with a service record that you can read and see and check on, are cars that are certainly going to lead the market. They offer great fun, beautiful styling, terrific performance, and I think a remarkable value so far. I think that they will be a great collectible Corvette for the future, for sure.
Omid asks, what costume would you wear for Halloween?
Omid, you cheated. For Halloween, I picked a really difficult costume. I went dressed as Donald Osborne going to work. It was tough, but I had to do it.
Patrick wants to know, What is your favorite Porsche and why?
Patrick, I don't have a favorite Porsche. I do have a number of favorite Porsches though. It's a marque that I really admire and like a great deal. I'd probably have to say an early pre-A 356 for the form. I love the form. I'm a big admirer of the design of aerodynamic cars before World War II, and this is a wonderful expression of that design taken to its ultimate form. And I cannot deny one of my favorite Porsches, which is, I think, one of the supreme examples of the sports racing car of the 1960s. The last time when you can drive your car to the track, race it, and drive it back home. The 904 Carrera GTS, which I drove in a video for the PCA, which you can see here. Everybody knows that I'm GT man. So one of my other favorite Porsches is the slightly unloved by some 928. I think it's a great example of what Porsche achieved in building a true gentleman's express. Comfortable, fast, capable, and something that people are just coming to right now. You can also hear what I really feel about the 928, along with my friend Jay Leno's opinion of the car, by watching the video here that we did in our exhibition, Collecting Moving Forward, Youngtimer Classics. And last but certainly not least, for the contemporary Porsche high-performance car, without a doubt for me, it's the 2016 911R. I drove one of these cars in another one of our YouTube videos. You can watch it right here. And to me, it is absolutely the essence of what a modern high-performance 911 should be. A car that really harks back to the true roots of Porsche performance. Direct, communicative, active, and nothing that you don't need.
Steve asks, what is your one must-have car?
Steve, I'm afraid here I'm going to have to go back to an answer I gave a little earlier. I don't have my one must-have car, but I'm really loving my odd pair right now, my Fiat Panda and my Ferrari Roma. Thank you to everyone who sent in your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we're really glad you sent them in. And if you're not a subscriber to this channel yet, do it right now. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when we put up new content. And be sure to watch as we reach our next great subscriber milestone. Thanks so much for watching.